So until you go to those deeper levels and ask the question, where's the impatience coming from? Where's the frustration coming from? Where's the anger coming from? You're not going to be able to change. I know from talking with you that you have spent a lot of time working on tension, thinking about tension, processing tension, and I think you've even come up with some categories of tension, and that's helpful. So tell me a little bit about why you've done that and why that's important.
Yeah, so professionally I work as a consultant and we work on strategy for clients, and I've just found year after year and client after client that giving people a frame of reference and categories really helps to then get to some tactical decision making.
Yeah.
It allows them to just kind of organize their thoughts. And so that's where my brain naturally goes to develop frameworks, because I don't like just talking about conceptual things if we can't do something with it. So tonight's attempt is to, get into 3 layers of tension and hopefully bring some clarity to folks, that, especially those that hate the gray.
Right. Well, you like whiteboarding. I love flow charts. Categories are super helpful to process complex information, I think.
No, I agree. So,
well, are you ready to get into it?
I'm ready.
All right, I'm excited.
Let's go.
Welcome to A World in Tension podcast, a place where we examine the opposing pulls and struggles of life to uncover clarity, purpose, and practical solutions. Come join us as we seek to get comfortable facing the uncomfortable. This is A World in Tension.
All right, so you've mentioned these categories of tension, which helps us to understand tension better. What are they, or how do you envision them?
Yeah, and I like to actually even refer to them as layers. And so if you imagine like an onion, and there's these 3 layers. So the outermost layer I call our external tension. So this is our tension with other people. The middle layer is what I label our natural internal tension. This is kind of a struggle between your heart and mind, your natural faculties. Mm-hmm. And then the innermost layer is your spiritual internal tension. And that's where we really, wrestle with those transcendent questions that are getting into the things of the spirit and soul. It's beyond your heart and mind. But I think the reason why I like to think about them as an onion is because, we experience all these tensions, like a bunch of them every single day, in all 3 of these layers, and we rarely want to enter in the center. But I would say the center is where you really start to find your identity. And that's the place where we want to spend more time. This is where I think these categories help to say, oh, number one, what's going on in each one of those, but how do I wrestle with actually what's important?
Mm-hmm. So, what about the external tensions? And when I think of external tensions, I actually think of more than just relational tensions. I think about like physical tensions. I mean, do you broadly define these as illness or, getting stuck in traffic? I mean, are these the everyday tensions that we would deal with, or?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, so I think a lot of the things, these tensions, first of all, have to do more with the relational or the human mm-hmm. elements of it. So the inner 2 are about you. Mm-hmm. The outer one is with other people. Now you'll find yourself in a bunch of situations, like you gave a situation like traffic, mm-hmm. right? Well, that's going to start to evoke these external tensions with other people. Like that's a great example, because you're all of a sudden insanely outraged with someone that you know nothing about in a second, right? And that's an external tension.
Okay.
Where you now need to probe in deeper of what actually is going on.
Well, give me some examples of external tension as it relates to relationship.
I mean, it can be with anyone. It can be a close relationship with a spouse, a parent, child, but then it can also be friendships, acquaintances, some random guy I see on the street that I'll never see again. And honestly, it can be complete strangers in a social media sphere. But it's really getting into, just kind of coming back to the core topic of tension, that it's an opposing pole. So you have an opposing pole with someone out there for various reasons. So that's really that outer layer. I mean, it can range from like differences in personal preferences to like heated debates about really contentious topics that you care about. But that's that outermost layer that people see our personality, at least publicly. What we'll see as we talk about this is that you can't. The onion's all connected.
Okay.
But I guess part of the point I want to make is don't just live. I think politics is a great example. People can live on the outermost part of the onion layer and never probe deeper into themselves about, why do I feel so strong? Why, if I'm a Republican, why do I hate that Democrat so much, and vice versa? This is a human being I'm talking to. If we just stick at that external layer where it's kind of superficial.
Okay, so pretty much any tension topic could peel back all of those layers at some point.
Yeah, I mean, I think if we're taking time to reflect, and we say like get comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
To me, part of doing that is to quickly probe to what's the deeper issue here.
Okay, so we've talked a little bit more about the external tension. The next two layers that you talked about were the natural internal tension and then the spiritual internal tension. Kind of help me understand those next two layers a little better.
Yeah, so the natural internal tension is really, the way to think about it is it's a struggle between our heart and mind. And I know, that's kind of a mystery of like, what is that inside of us?
Yeah, we've talked about how the heart is not, the heart is the mind.
Yeah, so, but it's really the distinction I'm trying, and I don't want to solve that riddle. Like,
Right.
what I'm trying to get at is there's a part of us that's kind of more logically oriented and a part that's more feeling oriented. Yes. And we debate between those two all of the time. And I think this kind of good distinction between external and internal natural is that a lot of the external stuff gets spoken, whether by words or like social media keystrokes. It's spoken, whereas the natural internal stuff stays in us. And there's a lot of wrestling that people don't see. And I think because of that, because it's not verbalized, we often fool ourselves of it too.
That's a great way to visualize the difference between the external and the internal. That really helps, I think, me to visualize it.
And so like what does that look like? So I wrote down a few examples. So like, and these seem silly. They can be like, more serious ones or silly. And so like, should I splurge on a stylish outfit or go to Costco to get my clothes? Right. And you're like, well, what's the struggle there? Well, it's the difference between saving money or like looking good. Right. So my desires versus my logical thought. I mean, a more stringent or serious one would be, should I be strict or extend mercy to my disobedient child who's disobedient every single day? Am I going to be the compassionate father, or am I going to be the one that lays down the law? And how do I balance that? That's a struggle between heart. I mean, you talk to a mother, that struggle owns them daily.
Here's what I'm hearing, okay? And this is settling in now. But that inner conversation that we have with ourselves all day long is, I think what you're saying is this natural internal tension. It's the conversation. You're arguing with yourself a lot during the day. At least I am.
No, that's exactly it. And I'm trying to get us more conscious of that, if we're not, that there is a battle going on.
Right.
And part of the point here is that there isn't a right side. There isn't like, if I'm always logical, I win. Wrong. That doesn't fly in a dating relationship, right? Or if I'm always heartfelt, that doesn't win. Guess what? I can't run a business and make money, right? Just So you can't pick a side.
Well, you gave another example, and now it's coming to mind. But the chocolate example, how much chocolate can I eat before I feel bad about myself? And that's so true. Like, you sit down, you're eating junk food or whatnot, and at some point you start to have this conversation inside your head, like, oh man, should I stop? You don't have that conversation with your wife. You don't process these externally. It's a very internal thought, and that really, I think, helps me to visualize what you're talking about. But you would say there's an even deeper tension or layer of tension that we need to get to. And what's that? What do you call that?
So that's
the spiritual.
Yeah, the spiritual internal tension, and that's at the core of who we are. And I mean, if trying to understand the heart and mind was hard enough, now you're talking about things like spirit and soul, and it's really complicated. And again, I'm not, philosophers have philosophized about what all that means, but again, that's not my intent. My intent is to get to the practical side of this is where we start to wrestle with God, essentially. Is it going to be, this is where we get into our way of control and go into those upper layers, or are we going to surrender to Him? And it really takes on a different, the questions start becoming different than what we ask ourselves in the heart and mind. And I think part of the problem is Christians and unbelievers alike spend way too much time in the heart and mind struggle when they should be down in here, because look, if we're designed by a creator, He knows what we wrestle with, number one, but He wants us to surrender this so we discover who we really are. So it's the deepest core of identifying who we are, and it impacts those outer layers. So like just an example on that, let's turn chocolate into money.
Okay.
And so you start asking the inner core questions, and this becomes, is this thing an idol in your life, to use kind of Christianese? Is this an idol that dominates every part of you, and it's more important than God and his work in your life? And so then that manifests up into, okay, now I'm going to control this in a natural sense of what I buy, what I wear, what people think about me, what house I need to be in. Should I be generous to look good? And then it goes even further out, again, to how I interact with other people, how I look down on others maybe. And so you may be on the outer layer driving your Lamborghini looking down on people and not realizing
that it's the inner layer that's led you to that place.
Yeah, you need to do business there, not be justified in the outer piece.
I know. I think it's interesting. I'm not sure that every person would be capable of going to that deeper layer, because I think in some regards, the heart and mind, or logic and emotion, is sometimes as deep as some people get. It's almost as if for some people that battle between emotion and logic, really, that is their moral compass, because there's not a God or a Lord or a moral construct that informs them. It's literally them.
Exactly. Well, and that's actually a question I was wanting to ask you, is like, why do you think people are so resistant to go down deep down? I mean, a clear indicator of that to me, of people who don't want to go in that inner layer, is they never want to talk about death, because that makes you think about things that you don't want to think about.
Right.
But so that's a really good answer that you gave, and I think part of what I want to do here too is flip that. I think too many people don't want to go in there because they have some preconceived notion or bias about God and like this whole spiritual realm. And I think there's a lot of opportunity there and value in going into that area.
Well, we've talked about this even just recently here. You mentioned that, you said it yourself, we are all created. And if we are made by a creator, then, there's questions, existential questions that we have to deal with. And so I would think that even someone who, doesn't have perspective for that, they don't know God or understand God, those questions come up in their mind, and I think they push them down because it's uncomfortable.
Yeah, and really, when they do, you just put on masks, don't you? And like, I mean, I personally struggle with how can you be, and don't get me wrong, I wear masks in different arenas too, and I don't mean like I intentionally put it on. I just say I get caught up in that, but to intentionally stuff something down and say, yeah, I'm going to wear this mask, this pretentious mask, let's just call that one, and be this, rich, pretentious person that doesn't care about other people, and I'm going to be happy with that. I don't know how people get stuck there.
I think confidence and cockiness, in a sense, it would be an example of that. I mean, how many times did my mom tell me, oh, all those guys that are, real cocky, they're all insecure. It's a mask, or it's covering something, that they're insecure about. But I think that's true. I think a lot of people stop at that innermost layer because it's scary. You have to reckon with something that's outside of yourself.
Well, so I mean, let's talk about that. Like, what then, if you're someone who maybe really struggles with getting into those, inner layers? So, what is some value that you would communicate with them about like why they should do it? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think the importance of going deep is that it can help you maybe unravel some things in your life that are unhealthy. You also made mention to sort of, things that we make idols of. And you said something about that's Christianese. So maybe we should try to, define that. But I would say when you make something an idol, you place something or someone above God, or above our Savior.
Yeah, no, and I think people who aren't familiar with that word may think it's like something sitting on your shelf that some pagan thing, like
like a physical idol, like Raiders of the Lost Ark, right?
Yeah, but I mean, it's really the things that consume our hearts. I mean, I think another thing too is, especially in our social media crazed world, I think there's a lot of young people that want to just chase after that celebrity or whatever. And if you hear from celebrities, they'll always tell you the traps of fame and how, I mean, really what's of value. Like, I guess the question is this, like, do you really think that not being famous, not owning a Lamborghini or whatever car of your choice, to know yourself better is of greater value? That's a question we need to ask ourselves. And I think that question is emphatically yes, but we also at the same time feel this pull to get those things. We want the best of both worlds, but I think those tend to work against each other.
Well, in answer to your question, though, why, what's the value of going deeper? I would say it's to begin, at least for me personally, to unravel things that have taken a higher priority than they should. And, I think analyzing what these external tensions that I may experience on a daily basis, and driving is really a good one for me. I struggle with road rage, and I struggle with impatience on the road. So, I think we can start to look at those superficial things on the outside of the onion and go, okay, that's like the little worm, what's below it? Or that's the tip of the iceberg. What's below it? And as we dig deeper, I think those things that we struggle with that we think are, minutia or not a big deal, actually when we start to dig a little deeper, can reveal, sin patterns that we may have. And I think that's probably a really good exercise.
So
I'm trying to think of a specific one.
That's exactly where we want to go. Let's do a practical exercise, and I'll start with one. You think of one too, because again, these, just to kind of recap, we have these categories or layers to think through it.
Mm-hmm.
Now let's apply them to our real life,
Mm-hmm.
and then let's have that. Let's let God change us, right? And if you're not ready for that, be changed.
Well, I've already got one, so I'm excited to work through this on air. I really am.
All
so
right.
You go first, but I've got one.
Okay.
So.
Well, you can go.
No, go.
Okay. So the one I think about that has been just brought up, and in my experiences, and you were involved with that conversation, was sort of the an interaction with someone on the street, and I kind of mentioned that a little bit already,
Mm-hmm.
but you could stop there and just look down on them and not even care about them. You just cross the street and never deal with them.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue you've missed something. So I actually have engaged with those folks, and I do get caught into this. He's gonna take my money. How can I just talk to him? But usually my tactic is that I've done this outside of work before, where I've worked people walking by me, and so it's a little bit embarrassing, right? But at a previous job, and but when I got down to the point of actually getting to, you realize this person has not talked to anyone probably for a while that is actually taking them seriously, that's maybe of sane mind, right? And when you get down to talking to them, you realize that, in the end, I rarely end up giving them money, because the conversation has moved from that. I think they're just appreciative that I've engaged them as a person, asked their name, figured out who, what they're about, and typically prayed for them. And I will tell you, I think that not only is what's right in the context for them,
Mm-hmm.
but for me, it makes me feel alive. I really have had 5 to 10 minute interactions with people on the street that I'll probably never see again.
Right.
That were so much more life-giving than relationships I've had with people with years that we haven't cut down through the surface in a church environment.
Mm-hmm.
And it's that rawness and realization. I don't think if I didn't start asking myself questions about this person as a human being,
Mm-hmm.
that I would really start to see the value of them and the situation.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been impactful for me, and I know there's more if I thought about it. But so what's yours?
Well, this is going to be a little different, because I think you've had a chance to kind of think that one through a little bit, or at least you've processed that. So you may have to help me through mine. But some folks around me have started to mention that when they see me, they feel like maybe I'm not as happy or as upbeat, and that I'm maybe a little shorter or impatient sounding. And so, my wife has said, hey, is something, you okay? Is something going on? Or, and I've sensed, just a little more impatience, a little more short-tempered. And so, that's an external tension. Someone looks at you and says, boy, something seems wrong. He seems unhappy about something. So that's a physical manifestation, and it's, as you mentioned, it's being discussed.
Yes. Well, and I would say someone's your wife in this case, trying to get you to probe into that natural internalization of what's going on.
So then we go to that next layer. And then, the question is, well, I'm asking myself now, the internal dialogue, well, what's going on? What's different? And so it's revealing that, there are some areas where I probably feel a little overwhelmed, and a little frustrated, and I don't really know what to do with it. Which then, if I take that to the even deeper level of trying to figure out what the spiritual tension is there, it reveals, I think, in my life that there are some areas in my business life and even in my church life where I'm not trusting God. Like I'm not willing to give some worries over to Him. I'm trying to deal with it on my own.
Well, and I think one of the beauties,
Not surrendering.
Yes, well, that's what I was going to say.
Surrendering.
I think one of the beauties of the innermost layer is that the question's always the same. What do I need to surrender, and what am I trying to control?
That's exactly right. That's what I'm trying to say.
Now, figuring out what that is can be a little bit challenging, but that is always, I think, the God question, and the value is the more we get to appreciate the surrender, we realize that the outermost tension layers start to diminish. So that's the struggle between your heart and mind becomes less. This is why people should have smiles on their faces, because the inner conflict is gone.
Well, I'm actually smiling thinking about it, because this discussion really is helping me to kind of see, it is becoming very practical, because the layers of tension, it's like a tool. You can start to look at these easier to identify, more external tensions, and you can use that. It's like a weed.
Yes.
Right? It's the weed. But like you're digging around in the dirt trying to find the root, and you want to pull it out by the root. And so these little weeds in our lives help us to identify these roots of sin or struggle that need to be addressed.
Yeah, and I think the real value is that the outer layers there's always something getting us, right? But we don't try to make the connection about why. And I do think, I will say, I think the natural internal tension of your heart and mind and things going on there can be very, very complicated, the questions you have to ask yourself. So I'm actually, and we're not going to get into it on this podcast, and I don't know if I could even do it in a podcast, but there's some kind of diagnostics that I've come up with there based on some biblical concepts about like what our desires lead us to. But if you can cut down to the bottom line question, that's even more expedient. But sometimes life isn't that simple, right? I mean, like there's reasons why people go to counselors for many, 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 many years
to try to dig back far enough to get what really is the spiritual internal tension, or what really is the natural.
And I'm saying that because I don't want to diminish, like, hey, this can all be answered in one question. There's years of layers within us that have built, and sometimes it's hard to kind of get to the root within those in ourselves. So, and it's always going to be a struggle. But I'm glad that this has been good to unpack it. I'm glad it's kind of laid out how categorization and thinking about it. You have to do something with categories and make it into like a story. And so we've made it into layers and how they connect. And that was the goal. So I think we hit it. What else do you think we need to share with the listener before we go?
Well, this really hammers home to me the importance of thinking about tension as something that God is using.
Give me more. What are you saying there? Well, I like where you got. I just want to hear more.
To me, it's like, oh, okay, there's these layers, and as I said, the external tensions can reveal more about the next layer down. So the natural internal, and then that can reveal more about the spiritual internal tension. And when we can get into that innermost layer, we're really dealing with things at the core of who we are. And so I would say identification of those innermost things that need to be answered is sometimes hard, but you can start to see where these, easier to identify external tensions can start to give us hints about where we need to go next.
Yeah, well, and you're reminding me of something really important, which is the value of other people. I mean, we've kind of done it on air. We didn't rehearse
No.
what you were going to just walk through,
Right.
but and this is kind of standing out to me, like this has happened to me in life where I've wrestled in my brain with something and it's stayed in my brain, and then I verbalize it to someone, and sometimes just saying it to someone else helped me to go, wait, that's really dumb, or like that doesn't make any sense, and that need to process with others, because people can see things you can't see, and I think God designed it that way. That's part of our overall surrender, right? Like we're surrendering to Him, but also being open to others to kind of be a vessel of not being afraid and vulnerable to people, because we're ultimately supposed to get into other people's lives, right? And if we're not a vulnerable, honest person, we don't know ourselves, how are we going to do that well?
Right.
So,
Well, I think another little practical tidbit that I pull out of this would be how this exercise can point us towards prayer that is targeted towards asking God to help us with those innermost issues.
that's good.
And the example that I'll give is related to, say, poor driving, etiquette. I'm impatient on the road. I'm going fast. Don't get in my way, or I'm going to be frustrated, right? I don't know. Controlling that specifically is just behavior modification. And if something doesn't change at my heart, I'm going to continually wrestle with simple behavioral modification.
That's a great example, because the external consequence would be a cop gives you a ticket, or you get into an accident,
or someone gets mad at me for being aggressive, and we have a road rage incident or an altercation or something of that nature. And that's just sad. It's physical, it's external, but it's also just behavior modification.
Yeah.
And that's not ever going to work.
Yep.
It really isn't. So until you go to those deeper levels and ask the question, where's the impatience coming from? Where's the frustration coming from? Where's the anger coming from? And start to deal with those things, you're not going to be able to change. But through prayer and asking God to start to change your heart, all of a sudden those external things become less of an issue.
Yeah, and as you listen through these episodes, the listener's probably starting to piece together that we're kind of doing that we tell some story about this thing going on amongst people. Usually stories aren't just about one person, right? And then we try to identify that like heart, mind struggle, the tension, and then we kind of get down in the core about like, well, what's really going on and how do we resolve it, right? Like we're doing that dissection, but this episode is helping to kind of frame it a little bit.
And that's why it's so important that we did it.
Exactly. So hopefully the listener hears that, and most importantly, not just to hear other stories about others, about how this is impacting in your life, how it can create change. That's the goal.
I think it helps us moving forward too, as we sort of structure future discussions.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this has been a great talk, Rob, and I really appreciate it, and look forward to the next one.
Excellent. Me too.
Thank you all for listening. Join us next time for A World in Tension.